morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're based. My name is Gladys Sama. I'm the editorial director, and I'm so pleased to welcome you today to our Zero Trust 101 Summit brought to you by Rubrik. This has been brought to you by the editorial staff of Virtualization and Cloud Review and RedmondMag.com. We've worked really hard to bring together some of the best independent experts on this topic for this event, so we really hope that you enjoy it. Before we start today's event with these two great sessions, we do have a couple of announcements. First, this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You'll get an email when the replay is available, generally within the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. Second, each of today's two sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A area of your console as they come up, and we'll get as many of them answered as possible toward the end of each session. Next, at the end of our second session, we are giving away a pair of high-end Bose wireless noise-canceling Bluetooth headphones, for which you must be present to win. So please do make sure to stay on for the entire event. And finally, there is a demo link from our sponsor Rubrik that's available for you today on the console right now. So please do download and check that out. It's because of Rubrik underwriting this content that we can bring you this summit. So thank you so much to Rubrik for sponsoring it and supporting the community. And we ask you to check out those resources so we can bring you more events like this in the future. Now, on to the first session of today's summit, Zero Trust 101, Understanding Zero Trust and Why It's Key for Enterprises in 2022 and Beyond. This session features Ian Thornton-Trump, CISO at Cyjack. Ian is an ITIL certified IT professional with 25 years of experience in IT security and information technology. He served with the Canadian Forces Military Intelligence Branch, joined the CS Military Police Reserve, and retired as a public affairs officer. After a year with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as a criminal intelligence analyst, Ian worked as a cybersecurity analyst and consultant for multinational insurance companies, banking, and regional healthcare. Ian, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, and a huge shout out to our sponsor Rubrik for making all this happen. Well, once again, I'm back like the renegade master I am, and if you notice a little bit, I've been doing a lot of this discussion and talking quite a bit about Zero Trust in the last little while. And as I've sort of gone through it, the doors and my eyes have been opening. I've gotten tremendous feedback, lovely questions. So if you do have questions, please use the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to all that. I work at this Zero Trust issue from the threat actor perspective. So I'm going to bring a unique sort of spin on Zero Trust and focus a little bit on more of the security elements, which you'll soon find blossom into business elements, and it's all sort of under the roof of business transformation. So with that as my intro, let's move on to our first kind of understanding that we need to apply. And possibly what I'm going to consider is one of the first issues when it comes down to a delta between a framework that was coined in 1994 and our current threat landscape. Because as I like to say, there may not be an inside or outside to your network architecture anymore. So how's this all going to work in practice? And I think this is transformational thinking is probably the best way to go about this, because clearly what we've been doing for the past 30 years of IT hasn't been working particularly effective. I say this because we've seen a steadily increase in cybercrime. We've seen businesses continue to be attacked and succumb to attacks such as ransomware. And I think it's really actually even more spectacular to put this into the context of understanding that this is a huge issue and a huge opportunity space as well for your organization to bolster its defenses. And I've actually been quite critical of Zero Trust. And as we go through this presentation, I think you'll begin to understand exactly where the issues and problems may lie. within moving forward into the zero trust landscape. I think one of the hardest things to actually get your mind around is the fact that going through the process of starting to adopt a zero trust strategy for your organization should not become a zero trust philosophy. And as we move forward in this presentation, you're going to see how that can actually be an incredibly dangerous situation if your strategy or the application of the zero trust framework becomes a philosophy. So I mentioned right now that I think the proper way to begin to talk about zero trust is a strategy with a long tail. There is no possible way any organization or enterprise, shall we say, in the medium, that has maybe a couple thousand employees, is going to realize zero trust in anything short than a year to maybe a year and a half or even longer. This is because in a lot of cases, organizations are dragging behind them a legacy of technology that might be very difficult to move into a zero trust environment because there are some things that may be invisible. And one of the keys, and when I start breaking it down for you, is really understanding the visibility of your environment. It's also about setting a strategic goal for your organization, and it's not about the journey per se, because as you begin this process of discovery to sort of see what your heat map, if you will, looks like when you're talking about the adoption of zero trust strategies, you may be overwhelmed with all of the unknowns, or the unknowns and the fact that there are endemic issues in IT within your organization that make the level of visibility, orchestration, and automation, which are the key components of zero trust, possibly unattainable in the early stages of this particular journey. And so one of the keys is to really align expectations within the organization and discover what the art of the possible is. How are we going to approach this journey? How are we going to work together as a business? The other problem that is encountered within the idea of moving an organization to a zero trust framework or a zero trust strategy is unfortunately, organizations are dynamic. And what I mean by that is when you begin this journey, you may not end up in the same place that you were before because business decisions will be made, new technologies will be adopted, possibly also mergers and acquisitions along this way. So you have to understand that the approach that I'm really recommending here is the framework and strategy one, as opposed to just deciding that zero trust is how we're going to do business from as we go on. And I think to underscore this particular fact is there's two issues that are driving this right now. So the first thing I like to kind of make fun of with the little Lord of the Rings meme, if you haven't seen that as the central sort of theme of this, is that I think you need to really incorporate an overall strategy to start the discussions within your organization. That should come from engagement with the organization and not simply a magazine that an executive read on the way between cybersecurity conferences in like San Francisco, for instance. So I think it's also important that there is a driving factor here that zero trust and that particular industry is high growth right now. It's a popular way, I think, of organizations expressing a disappointment in the amount that they've invested in cybersecurity and are still not seeing the net results of those investments. And that's what I think actually the folks that have been talking about zero trust that go back into the 90s really were sort of more interested in. They weren't necessarily interested in sort of what we've done now is we've made this layer cake of cybersecurity. I think what they're saying is that if we look at the foundational controls that we need in an organization, we know that there's going to be gaps in those foundational controls. So how can we build on a more solid foundation than we've ever had before? So as you can see in the language that I'm using to sort of describe Zero Trust and to really start to drill down into the meat of it, this is about setting strategic goals for the organization and allowing digital transformation to incorporate Zero Trust, not the other way around where Zero Trust is going to drive your digital transformation strategy. Because when that happens, it means IT is sort of trying to get outside of the comfort area of the business. So again, in order to be successful in starting a journey to a Zero Trust strategy, you do need to be able to engage with the business and align it to the business's goals and the business's opportunities. Now, obviously, when you're talking about Zero Trust, trust is absolutely a huge component of this. And trust is really difficult to parse down. And this is the danger zone of trust, in that where we are today is we tried in the early days of IT, and some of you may remember this, some of you may have struggled with this, but you remember something called network access control, where every port on a switch, every workstation, every user had to have a certificate, and there was a chain of authorization along that all of those different requirements. This was in order to drive out things like segmentation. And it quickly became overwhelming and was quite largely abandoned because the solutions based on the 802.1x protocol were poorly implemented by a lot of vendors. So we tried to tackle the issue of trust with things like network access control, and it kind of failed. I know that there are some organizations who have made the huge investment in certificate management, have really had a solid grip on their ITAM and what they recommended in terms of key pieces of their network infrastructure in order to implement it appropriately. But this all fell apart when there were vendors such as Cisco that became franking companies by purchasing voice over IP endpoints, and trying to get them to work with network access control became a nightmare, because it was essentially vendor product X trying to work with vendor product Y. And so we had a real problem on our hands. Now, where I think Zero Trust became kind of a really influential part of the discussion, and obviously influential enough to show large growth opportunities, was really around leveraging digital transformation, cloud, private cloud, and hybrid cloud. And so as we get into this particular presentation, we start getting into the meat of this, we need to understand that there are limits to which we can trust everything within our organization. So Zero Trust can't be zero, because as we know, nothing is absolute in IT. There are certain levels of trust that you need to apply within your organization in a manner in order to support the business itself. So now we're going to dig in a little bit, because what Zero Trust in practice offers and has set as a goal is 100% visibility, automation, and orchestration within your organization. And here we can see sort of all of the key areas that Zero Trust incorporates in terms of a framework to move your business forward to this, I would say, goal at the other end. Now, we all know that anything that says 100% is nearly impossible to achieve, if not possible to achieve. So the first strategic piece of Zero Trust 101 is to pick your battles appropriately and set goals that are both reasonable to reach. I will tell you right now, I've never seen an organization manage to get Zero Trust sort of past about 80% in a heat map, because there are always going to be areas that you don't know, but what's required is a risk assessment of what are the things that we will just have to accept in terms of a standard. So as a good example, in the Zero Trust world, We may not have visibility on all the endpoints within our organization for various reasons. Could be contractors, could be Internet of Things devices, et cetera, et cetera. We may not be able to automate every process. There will always potentially be some manual processes that we have to embark upon, and not everything within an organization can be orchestrated. Certainly, the orchestration, automation, and visibility piece is something that is more achievable within the cloud than it will be in your legacy environment for sure. And especially when you start talking about OT environments, that's even more to the point. So when you talk about like the vendors that are out there, they're the experts in this place of looking sort of at your pile of rubble and pointing out to you, these are the things that might be early opportunities to apply either our technology, or these are opportunity spaces where, a product from another vendor, because let's be fair, there isn't really a vendor out there that can offer you a solution to all of the components that are required to move your organization towards that 80% plus zero trust. Now, this is sort of where when a lot of people come to me and they talk to me and they say, Ian, what is sort of a foundational thing? What is one of the things that we can do first? And I always tell them that under complete control of the organization generally is identity and access management, okay? And committing your organization to multi-factor authentication with single sign-on, and I'll get to why that is important in a moment. But again, a lot of the organizations that I end up seeing their infrastructure, there are systems that are not possible to secure with the technologies of today because they may run on operating systems of yesteryear that are not supported in terms of vendor solutions when it comes to IDAM, identity and access management. The other problem that is sort of indicative of an IDAM issue within the organization is also RBAC, right? Role-based access controls. If these things are not sorted out, if you don't have 100% accuracy when it comes to user accounts within your organization, that's the first place that is entirely under your control to get to in terms of zero trust, right? So those are the type of things that I look for within organizations, and I say, what is your road of digital transformation? So say we find a system that's part of the business, it's a business system, and it has an owner, and it is an old system that as a vendor solution can't bring up to and fulfill any of the zero trust goals, frameworks that we're trying to apply. You have to now advise them to what is the digital transformation solution for said system, and then during the procurement phase, maybe the in-house project management phase, you have to insert the various things that you're looking for in terms of that replacement system as part of the digital transformation initiative within your organization. And I've always said that the easiest way to spend money in any organization is to spend someone else's money and try to align the goals of the security team, the goals of the IT team with the overall goals of the business. And you'll find that you can, for very little of your own budgetary money, make massive security gains by supporting others in the organization. So as a place to start, think about identity management within your organization and move and start to move pieces of technology or processes into place that secure and give you 100% visibility. And we'll talk about automation and orchestration as part of this, but start with identity management. You can't go wrong if you get that to near 100%. So the next piece of this is endpoint, right? Now, endpoint is a difficult kind of thing to describe because there are multitudes of different types of endpoints. Servers, IoT, CCTV cameras, user iPads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So endpoint management, or ITAM as we call it, IT asset management, becomes really important for that next phase of adopting zero trust, right? Now, the visibility needs to be there for sure. Automation, automated builds, and automated application deployment and configuration, automated security tools, but also really around endpoint hygiene and making sure that you can detect anomalous behavior on the endpoints. So this is not about making users' lives more difficult. This is about upgrading your tool set so that your tool set can provide these things, I'm going to say, in a back-of-house way, not, popping up sinister warnings that, less than 95% of people in your company understand what it even means, but having the visibility to know when, in terms of a signal-to-noise ratio, when you may have a security incident happening, evolving, or potentially going on within your organization when it comes to the endpoint hygiene. So again, this is where now your technologies that you have need to advance with the complexities of the different types of endpoints that you're using and provide, both the visibility, automation, and orchestration opportunity space. So then we get to the data. And I will say that organizations look at data management as being a really terrible silo between the business and the IT department, to the point where, IT is always ready to turn around and say, well, the business owns the data. I don't disagree with that statement. However, as the facilitators for access to that data, as the facilitators of backup of that data, generally the business has no visibility on those things at all. So again, get away from, a siloed mentality when it comes to where the responsibilities are. Work collaboratively as a team and wrap around the idea of a zero trust framework when it comes to data, because data will multiply very rapidly across your network as folks pull down reports and sensitive data onto endpoints, all right? And unfortunately, what we've seen IT do is, because of that delta between the business and IT, data retention becomes a huge problem. And I've always told organizations that the more data that you have, the more risk that you're taking on board. And in fact, now I've seen reports when I was working for a financial services company, which continued to back up terabytes and terabytes of data that was no longer needed by the organization, but was just kept on live running platters without a plan to archive it according to data retention policies. So again, when you talk about data and you talk about things like data retention policy, all of a sudden compliance and risk has a huge opportunity, as do they in endpoint management, but more so in the data for the business. They have that fiduciary responsibility to be aware of the types of data that are being collected, how long they've been retained for, and stuff like that. So data is very policy driven until you get to the nirvana of a situation where all of your apps actually contain the data, as opposed to what we have right now, which is a hodgepodge of SharePoint sites where I like to say data goes to never be found again, shared drives and drives that have been inherited over a long period of time that have things like copy of access database, right? Ridiculous. So data is a huge problem, and it requires a commitment from the business to reduce the data footprint, and then it requires a bunch of tools that IT has to have on the back end. And I'll tell you this, backup becomes increasingly important. Obviously, it's a huge issue with regards to ransomware attacks and recovery and BCP, business continuity program. all of this stuff is really around data management. So again, some organizations, healthcare especially, have branches that have one leg in IT and one leg in just the management of the healthcare data that's being generated, and this is usually called an HIS department or Health Information Systems department. I'm seeing this model becoming more and more important as time goes on because it's the data that gets you in trouble with the regulator. It's the data that the ransomware actors are after, and if you're in the intellectual property space where you have a lot of IP, it's the data that either espionage actors or cyber criminals want to get in order to monetize it in one way or another. So again, you can't start with the data because until you have identity and endpoints, you really can't possibly tackle this issue other than perhaps making sure that you're backing everything up. But the problem is that you may be not efficient in what you're actually backing up. Okay, apps then. Apps is really a double-edged sword because this is where now trust becomes a huge factor, especially when you're dealing with third-party SaaS applications, and even to a certain extent, apps that are legacy within your organization that require, for instance, client-server architecture. I know everyone here that when I say the words edit the .ini file will cringe because that's been a long journey of where we have come from. Apps are now where their trust of the app and the custodial responsibility of that organization, including indemnification, has to take place. Now, I said a bunch of non-IT words there, and I really, truly mean it, because in the application space where we are today, the average organization at the large-scale enterprise has over 200 to 250 applications that they drive their business on. Many of them are third-party and or SaaS. This is where the trust issues now happen, and it's between the procurement team, it's between the technical team, it's between the due diligence and counsel's office to write terms and conditions which are reasonably fair and your organization is indemnified due to certain perils that could happen, such as what happens if Salesforce loses all our data? What are we going to do? How are we going to recover from that, right? So, and there's use cases on both sides. In some cases, the organization will download on a regular basis or back up their third-party cloud applications because they have to. Now, the other aspect of this, especially at enterprise, is where you're now building your own applications. And we've seen major vulnerabilities that have happened as a result of on-premise software, as a result of libraries that had vulnerabilities in Charlotte, Spring for Shell, Log4j being some great examples of those. Apps need a lot of, I would say, care and visibility in terms of what their components are so that vulnerability management can occur. So as an example, a software bill of materials as part of your software development lifecycle process or secure software development lifecycle process has now become a major initiative because of things like understanding what your own attack surface is when a major vulnerability is announced, right? The other thing, too, that we need to really incorporate into the SDLC that doesn't break zero trust is, of course, making sure that what we're putting in is done in the most secure way possible. Now, unfortunately, visibility may be very limited in development environments because one of the cardinal sins that has been committed by organizations is to not secure their development environment as they would a production environment, right? And we've seen this with the infamous supply chain tax, SolarWinds and Kaseya. So apps and app development has to incorporate probably the widest swath of the business, including identification of apps that are on that heat map that may, for one reason or not, have those gaps in visibilities or have those silos. These are what I like to call the unsupported. And unsupported is really dangerous unless you have the in-house expertise. An unsupported third-party application that your company relies on is absolutely deadly because it's going to require a ton of extra tools and controls to find out if anything wrong has happened or occurred. Now, infrastructure. Infrastructure is now becoming a huge bugbear in the room. Now, you do gain a little bit in terms of infrastructure zero trust management, so long as you trust the third party like Amazon, Microsoft, or Google Cloud, wherever you're putting your infrastructure. So there is a level of trust. And even Amazon and Azure and Google Cloud, if you look at the what they call the shared trust model, should tell you exactly what they're looking after and what you need to look after. So on the infrastructure side, it gets really cloudy and is actually sort of like the thing that leads you from the discussion that you had around apps and third-party responsibilities. That transfers over into the infrastructure where you have to look at the various layers of that infrastructure, which you're just going to have to trust the vendor. You're going to have to ask that vendor for assurances that they are practicing vulnerability management, that they have a SOC, et cetera, et cetera. So infrastructure now becomes very much a shared responsibility between the IT department traditionally, which looked after the bricks and mortar network internally, and then, of course, the infrastructure that they were provided in their private cloud or in terms of the servers. But now there's a requirement, if you're going to kind of zero trust your infrastructure, you need to be able to monitor that infrastructure for anomalous behavior as well, because sometimes that anomalous behavior could be a security incident, or it could just be the provider of your infrastructure doing something strange or having a failure itself. So again, this is not an absolute thing, and many organizations that have digitally transformed all of a sudden find that they've lost the traditional visibility with their traditional tools that they had when it came to the things that have been digitally transformed into the cloud. And now to look at the network. So as I had in a slide, and I didn't put it in this time, but because I really wanted to focus on all of these different steps, but the network goes only so far as the connections into and out of your business, right? And that becomes a potentially huge issue when it comes to public-private cloud situations where there's not enough redundancy and the fact that there's sometimes single points of failure, especially when hosting your own DNS. And the network actual physical layer one problems that can result from a drunk farmer with a backhoe. Okay, so there are a number of different scenarios here with the network, with DDoS attacks, perhaps on your own private connection to your cloud infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So the network really now has to be approached as a very much a shared responsibility between the provider, the downstream provider, the cloud provider, et cetera, et cetera. So I would argue now that the one thing that you're going to have to relinquish the most trust in zero trust is the actual network, the physical layer of that particular network, and any third party you can argue that apps, infrastructure, and network are sort of all under the one roof if your third-party DNS somehow becomes a problem, like the attack on Dyn DNS that shut down most of the East Coast of the United States several years ago. So these things now become a situation where, although you want to try and proclaim yourself in the zero trust environment, there is always going to be a certain level that you're going to have to relinquish. So now that we've talked through those things and you've sort of begun to strategize how we can kind of move forward, it's an iterative approach. It's where if you get into identity management to the point where you've got the visibility, right? You've got the automation. So as an example, when you create that user ID, it automatically provides the various permissions that particular ID is going to get using RBAC, right? And not copying user Susie to user Leanne. That's what we used to do a long, long time ago. That's not cool anymore. So the identity piece, and then you strive for automation, and then you strive for orchestration. What do I mean by that? Well, once you've solved the identity management system, this is how it should all work, in my opinion again. A new employee is hired by a hiring manager and entered into the HR system. Or you could even have a system where the HR system flags the employee as a leaver. That automation piece should automatically create the identity or perhaps disable that entity and back up that particular user and archive them. Or, it kicks off a series of chains of events to actually take the human out of the identity and access control permissions for that particular entity. Now, the orchestration part bleeds over into the endpoint and the application. So once you have the identity, you have what they should be accessing. There should be a list of which software they need, and then all of a sudden the software that they need based on the role and permissions that have been entered now all of a sudden provides all those applications and provides the necessary configurations to that user. All hands off, right? That's the ultimate way. But as I've argued in a lot of cases in multinational companies, you've got language barriers. There's over 150 different keyboard types supported by Microsoft. You do have some real challenges in identity and access management, and that's why many organizations turn to third-party tools or even Active Directory replacements for the modern challenges that we're facing with organizations and looking for solutions that provides SSO. And why is that becoming more critical? Well, as you start provisioning more SaaS applications into your organization, accepting the risks of those SaaS applications, what you want is to have a single point of control in your organization for access to those applications. The only way you get it is through SSO sign-on, right? Because here's what used to happen. A department, say a marketing department, decides that they're going to implement something like HubSpot. Cool. IT wasn't at the table. IT's thinking, man, it's a third-party app. I don't have to worry about it, right? Well, 3 years later, after the sales marketing manager, who turns out they were a far better sales marketing manager than they were a systems administrator, we go into the system and you find that there are a whole bunch of accounts that are still active, that you're still paying licensing for, that have not been deprovisioned, and probably have passwords that may have been disclosed in a data breach at some point in time. Huge issue. And this was because if you can't disable the user in some sort of single point of truth within the organization, those departmental level SaaS implementations will take off like a freight train and quite possibly be costing a fair amount of your money. As an example, if you're not reducing your license count when you have a leaver or managing Office 365 licenses, Microsoft isn't going to tell you whether or not you've got too many licenses for your number of users because, hey man, that's a bunch of cash to them. So you really have to think these through about these use cases of onboarding and offboarding. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these other things because I think I made my point in understanding that we have very expensive gaps, I guess would be the way to call them, between realizing anything close to 80 to 90%. Now, the nice thing about this, and why I focused this discussion on identity and access management first as part of your first zero trust mission, should you choose to accept it, is post hoc ergo propter hoc. After it, therefore because of it. This is the enabling first step for an organization that wants to look at zero trust and starting to apply that throughout your zero trust journey and identifying areas that you can control or that you can gain visibility on and things that might be out of your hand. So that is sort of like my conceptual attack and framework of how to approach zero trust at a one-on-one level. Now, this is where it goes sideways, and this is what I really want to get through to folks in Zero Trust 101 level, is that when you look at the definition of a framework, it's a support structure or system that holds parts together, okay, or multiple different tools and solutions, has something stretched over it, and acts as the main structure, okay? So, a solid foundation, and then the different pillars, if you will, to hold up the roof of your organization and provide that robust cybersecurity. Then we get into where the danger lies, is that a theory or attitude that acts as a guiding principle of behavior. Okay, as an example, you can have a zero trust framework and be quite successful and move through life quite risk adverse, okay? And that's great. But if it impacts your attitude and behaviors of not trusting even members, even senior members and executives of your own organization, and putting them through a whole bunch of rigorous exercises to solve simple IT problems, this is where zero trust has gone sideways. And instead of, a proverbial hallway that's easy to walk down to, it flips down to a spiky pit where bad things start happening to the IT manager, IT director, or the person that essentially went overboard with their approach to zero trust and started to trust nothing and no one. It's important then to try and figure out how we can avoid this pitfall. And we turn to the razors. The first one of two competing theories, the simpler explanation of an entity is to be preferred. This is known as Occam's razor, okay? So rather than a whole big bunch of elaborate scenarios that you're trying to unfold, the idea is to simply understand the things that are within your power to persuade, engage, and support, or to accept the fact that that risk is a minimal risk to your organization, is backed up by a third party that you will have to trust with your data or with your applications or with the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if you're trying to get a data center inspection from Microsoft, that's not going to happen. What is going to happen, though, is they will provide you with their SOC 2 certifications and a bunch of security documents upon request. You will just have to trust those. And then the other one that will guide you through your zero trust journey is never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. And that's Horowitz razor. And the reason why I put that one up is it's not necessarily stupidity, but some sort of failure within your organization. And a lot of things just go sideways because that's the nature. A forgotten domain controller will go into tombstone mode and you won't be able to log in to a bunch of workstations, but one workstation will log in completely flawlessly, right? Again, you think, what is going on here? And you're checking the user accounts and you're checking everything in your infrastructure. But what it was a machine that basically over a time period got a time differential or a corrupted database, and that's why you can't log in anymore. So again, investigate and look for the evidence before you're trying to prosecute within your organization, and you'll stay on the right side. So again, when I really talk about Zero Trust 101, I'm asking you to consider this a business-wide initiative supported by the business. Even going so far as to identify why you need to do this at the board level, at a working group filled with stakeholders, and at the project level are the PMO's office and procurement, council's office, and all these different things. You need to know why you're doing it, what are the measurable outcomes, what is the responsible or reasonable spend that we can consider when we're going down this road, right? The outcome that you should be articulating with the Zero Trust 101 is to decrease the attack surface against current and future threat models, right? And then you get to explain what all the threat models are against the business and have those, because they ultimately support the business case for a Zero Trust framework adoption. Align this with the business goals. It should never end up in being an adversarial relationship within the business between IT and their Zero Trust framework and the business's ability to generate revenue. If you get between those two freight cars, you will be crushed, okay? I can guarantee it. There will be tears and sadness and probably an update to your LinkedIn profile. And then the other thing is to look at this as an opportunity across the business to engage in professional development of trying to align the business goals and the cybersecurity goals together in order to be that hard target and in order to be more robust as you move on. And these will require conversations and not necessarily technology in order to gain support within your organization for this. So a last word, and we hear it quite a bit about hybrid or multi-cloud environments. Most organizations come to this unprepared. They don't have the cybersecurity skills. They have gaps in their training, and the visibility, the digital forensics, incident response, and threat hunting at scale is beyond the capabilities of any IT, including fairly sophisticated cloud knowledgeable people. This is where third-party vendors have to enter the conversation, because the amount of extra work that it's going to take within your organization to support hybrid and multi-cloud environments creates all sorts of challenges to, I would call it, the visibility piece, the orchestration piece, and the automation piece around Zero Trust. So this is where you bring in experts, you bring in the appropriate tooling, and you listen to these vendors because they've been there, done that, and got the ticket, and will be able to provide you all the things you need. So now, Ian, you're asking me, okay, I get it, I understand it, where am I going with this freight train? Well, I'm telling you what you need. Okay? And I call it T3P. I call it tech, tactics, training, and procedures. Okay? So when you're talking about these infrastructures which you are moving into the cloud space and you want that level of visibility and you need that anomalous detection, you're going to be doing it in a number of places. And this is because not everything is a server in the cloud. There's a bunch of services that you can use in the cloud. And that is a fundamental shift from the castle and mortar and drawbridge networking that we used to do, where every server was in a rack in your data center, and you could tell a person to go and reboot that server. Okay? One thing to say is essentially there are no reboots in the cloud. At a certain level, you can't get onto the physical box. So CDNs, content delivery networks, and web application firewalls become one of your key tools in terms of both preventing cyber attacks on that infrastructure as well as preventing exploits from occurring on that particular device that you've secured in the cloud. SIEM and load balancing also become strategic in making sure you're getting the right information into your SIEM so you can tell whether or not there's some sort of anomalous behavior. I talked about multi-factor authentication and access controls from the environments. That applies to the repositories and signing key management as well if you're doing your own application development. Across the board, integrity monitoring and vulnerability scanning has to be clear. Just because it's in the cloud does not necessarily mean it's any more secure from an exploit than if it's in your own premise environment, depending on what levels of security you've got deployed in terms of your layered defense. You have to secure the development environment as you would from production. Case in point, Kaseya and SolarWinds being classic examples of that. The issues around data sovereignty, data protection means that moving production data using production data in a development environment is a risk. And it's a high risk in your organization, and in some places might break regulatory compliance as well. DR and BCP testing, absolutely critical to assure the business that should a terrible cyber event happen, you have it under control and you have a plan, an approach, and the data exact that we need to restore. And then finally, IPsec, VPN, and MPLS are ways of controlling the direction and the communications that are happening within your organization and externally to your organization. Because, folks, I've done audits where there's been clear text information being sent via API to exposed APIs in the cloud, and when that happens, tears form up, because this is how some organizations recently have been breached or have had all of their user information stolen, was because the APIs were not appropriately protected by readily available technology. And with that, it's now time to get some feedback from you and some questions, should you have them.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Ian. Great stuff. And we have a great question to open our Q&A with. As you implement Zero Trust architecture, how do you balance usability versus security when you need to ensure end user systems are secure, but the work still needs to happen? I imagine this would be a service desk nightmare.
It is 100% service desk nightmare. So this is what I did when I started approaching this particular problem. So first, build a test lab. Invite people from the business who you understand their roles and you understand the applications and you understand the data that they need access to, and have them come in and sit down and give you the feedback on a number of different tests in terms of security, right? They're the experts. So that first is, standard build, put the application layers on, apply all of your security, then bring the business in and make a list of the types of exceptions or types of permissions that you have to loosen up in order to get the maximum business functionality and an acceptable level of security, right, and usability. That becomes absolutely critical to your success. And then the next thing is, and it's kind of an IT thing, but maybe not an IT thing, internal comms. Talk about the change. Sell the idea that we need to be more secure and that some things are going to change, but we will have a support document in place for you. We will have the necessary supports from within your users because you've got a champion that's been an early adopter of this new architecture and these new pieces of software and these tightened restrictions, and she or he has managed to continue to get their job done within that same environment. So it's change management, it's test before deploy, and it's engage with the business and truly understand what they need to do the job so that your security doesn't get you a scolding and a talking to by some super angry vice president of sales.
Perfect. And another great question from an audience member, what is the best framework that you suggest? NIST, CMMC, or others?
So when you're talking about, sort of that overall framework of achieving the nirvana of zero trust, you're going beyond the actual typical, I'm going to say, audit frameworks that you come up with that have descriptive controls like NIST and CMMC. So NIST and CMMC and PCI DSS and ISO 27001, or even just your SANS, or it used to be SANS, it's now CSA 20, all great. But what you need to understand is those are very prescriptive and are generally the best route to go to solve a particular cybersecurity issue that we've seen in the past, right? But you'll soon quickly learn that if you have mitigating or compensating controls that go beyond and fall outside the scope, especially when it comes to third-party applications, you may find that you're doing a special blend of these. And I think, honestly, that's sort of the best discussion to have, is to say we have a cybersecurity audit standard within our organization that incorporates the best practices from these particular documents, right? So I tend to think a blended approach is the best one. And, base it on NIST, base it on any framework that you're finding is effective for your organization, or if you spent a lot of time selling them on that particular framework, continue that work. But look at zero trust as an opportunity to bring it to the next level.
Great. And last question, what do you recommend in terms of security controls on quote-unquote ancient things, which are both vulnerable and a compliance nightmare?
Yeah, that comes down to, I think the first thing is microsegmentation, and then you need to analyze possibly at the traffic layer if you can't get or pull logs off of the device. You need to be able to understand anomalous behavior with some sort of machine learning, a type of device that understands what regular traffic looks like, what peak traffic may look like, what end of month processing may look like, in order to eliminate the amount of false positives that you're going to be chasing. And then the other piece of it is just please work with the business. Plead and beg the business to look at using money to digitally transform into something that doesn't require your really expensive tools in order to monitor. So I sort of feel like it's an opportunity to have a dialogue with them and say, listen, like, our disaster recovery and business continuity for this particular system is a non-starter. Like, we're going to eBay to find parts for it, right? That's something that will make the risk and audit people and compliance people just like, red, heat map that red for the level of pain and risk that it's going to cause to your organization. So really, at that point, it becomes a discussion around this is how much it's costing us in terms of risk and finances in order to secure it. Clearly, there has to be an opportunity for something that is, from the last 5 years, if not the last, 3 years.
Great. And it looks like that's all the questions we have time for. Thanks again so much, Ian. Everyone, stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back at the top of the hour for our second session, Zero Trust 102, Top Enterprise Best Practices and Gotchas. In the meantime, take a quick minute to check out the demo link on your console provided by Rubrik, and sit tight. We'll be right back.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here, and a big thanks to our sponsor, Rubrik, for underwriting the summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session of our summit called Zero Trust 102, Top Enterprise Best Practices and Gotchas. Our speakers for this session are Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tricon Elite Consulting, and John O'Neill Sr., Chief Technologist at AWS Solutions. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with over 20 years of experience in the IT industry. Excuse me. His background includes data communications, networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. John has worked as a consultant, architect, executive, speaker, and author during his more than 20 years in IT. He's been involved in multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects. He has authored material for Thomson Reuters Aspiratory books and exec blueprints, and develops courseware for Pluralsight. Dave and John, it's great to have you guys here. Please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David, for the kind introduction. And John and I are so pleased to be here to talk about this topic because, as we look at cybersecurity heading into this year and beyond, zero trust has never been more important. So, we've got a great session lined up for everyone. Just a little bit of housekeeping. John and I love to make these sessions as interactive as possible. So if you have any burning questions, you don't have to wait until the end of the session. John and I will try to take those kind of mid-flights as we go. So if there's a topic as we're discussing it and something's really resonating for you and you'd like some more clarity, or you just have a general question about that topic area or the security domain in general, feel free to reach out because, it makes the session so much better for everyone. With that, John, welcome. And we've got an hour to spend with everyone. This is a great way to spend a Friday.
Absolutely, Dave. It's great to be here, and I always enjoy when we get a chance to get together and meet with our peers like this, and as you said, take questions and really have a conversation because, we are a community and we are in a new era with the security events that are going on, and I feel like it's more important than ever that we share, we collaborate, we communicate with one another.
Awesome. Well, let's get going, John. So starting off this with kind of our best practices, Ian did such a great job in the previous session. We're so lucky to have him as the warm up for our show here. It's always good to just take a look at a primer of kind of what is zero trust, because for me, one of the things I'm finding is as we talk to executives and E-teams around the world, John, I'm finding the executives are talking about zero trust. They go to briefings from the big vendors and, the security audits are coming through and they're saying, listen, zero trust is something that your teams need to be ready for. You need to make sure that, you're isolating who can do what and when and have a good audit trail behind that. And the reality of the situation for a lot of organizations out there today, John, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I see a lot of organizations in what I call a next finish model where, they spun up Active Directory 20 years ago. We implemented maybe some just default group policies that come with an Active Directory install, your default domain controller policy, maybe some other lightweight policies inside of there. But we never really revisited that over the years. So I consider it just almost like an out-of-box kind of default install. And the reality for me is you can't really make it easier for the bad guys if you do something like that. You need to be reevaluating what it is that you've got in place in your infrastructure. And you know what? Zero trust actually isn't that hard to get started with. And so I guess we'll start there, John, is that, I'm an organization and I know I need to do something with zero trust. I know it's important, but I don't really understand it. So could you maybe just take a minute and just give us that little primer on, in your mind, like what is zero trust and how we can at least start moving that discussion forward?
Absolutely, Dave, and I'm going to start out with my definition and then throw in a couple thoughts. And the way that I like to define zero trust is in the simplest manner possible, right? The fewer words, the better, because then I feel like it resonates with the broadest amount of people from the C-suite down to the production floor, if you will. So I define zero trust as assume breach. meaning whatever you're looking at, assume it's been compromised. Assume that there's a cyber attack underway. Assume that there's malware on that PC. Because guess what? If you assume that and you do all the things necessary to investigate or mitigate, in the best case scenario, you'll actually be wrong and have spent a little bit of time, call it wasted a little bit of time, and that's it. But if you don't assume breach and you don't investigate it and you're wrong, you could cost your company, right? And cyber attacks, malware in 2022 are starting to take organizations out of business. We've got universities that have been around for hundreds of years closing up their doors. Students losing scholarships and visas. We've got manufacturing companies that are shutting down and never coming back online. This is the reality of 2022. So zero trust, as you mentioned, is more important than ever, and we need to make the definition as straightforward as possible. So I go with assume breach. And one of the reasons that I think that this is such a hard concept for a lot of organizations, a lot of IT pros like ourselves. I mean, Dave, you and I have been going at this for a while, and you know, we've had moments where we just maybe didn't take it seriously enough, or that kind of thing, because most organizations that we work with today have multiple generations represented. So everyone from baby boomers to, you know, the current generation just coming out of high school and college going in. And all those groups have different perceptions of cybersecurity, of IT in general, and that sort of thing. And like you said, Dave, if we look at the bulk of that environment, so we look at those of us that have been in IT for let's say, 10 years or more, I guess unfortunately for me, I'm older, so my bio still says 20 years in IT, but it's well over 30 years now. And we spent most of our career being able to say things like, you know, viruses, malware, they're out there, but they don't really mess with my organization. What do we have that they would want? That sort of thing. The era that we're now with cyber warfare and everything else, where a lot of these attacks just want to disrupt and destroy. For instance, we've got a recent alert from the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. You know, this is a co-authored alert from the National Security Agency, CISA, the FBI, and they're basically, June 7th, came out and said, hey, the People's Republic of China has some state-sponsored cyber actors that are coming after you, and they're using ports that you have open that you don't need on your network. They're using on-patch things that patches have been released for, all that stuff we talked about. But in the past, you know, we could kind of take our time rolling out patches. We could take our time doing these other things. We can't do that anymore. So getting people out of that mindset of next finish, or I can't inconvenience my CEO because of a possible malware alert, I need to keep them online, or that kind of thing, that doesn't play today, because we could put our companies, our organizations at huge risk. And I mean, Dave, you and I deal with that all the time as we try and define this zero trust methodology to these executive teams and get them to buy in at what's really at risk.
Absolutely, John. And one of the big issues, just leaning back into that next finish model, is that by default, Active Directory places the domain administrators group as local administrators on everything. And that's the next finished install. So, oh boy, doesn't everything install well? Doesn't everything work properly? And also, isn't it so easy for that bad guy, that threat actor, to come in and gain access and gain lateral movement through my infrastructure? So when we look back at zero trust, yeah, go ahead, John.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it popped in. You and I remember a recent incident that we had to work together on, and this is much like a conversation we've had for years about email, right? Where people are like, well, why isn't email secure? What do you mean people could read it or whatever? Well, SMTP, the protocol that everybody's using, was designed, in the 60s. And Active Directory, the identity management that we're relying upon to act as that first access gate was designed in the late 90s. I mean, yeah, I realize it came out in Windows 2000, but you got to understand there were years worth of design going into that. Well, the threats in the late 90s, they couldn't even imagine what we're in right now. But you and I see a lot of organizations where the decision making that drives their AD and manages their AD is all based around that same mentality.
No, absolutely, and for sure. And like those insecure protocols, that next finish, just thinking that, okay, well, it's going to be good enough. And so back to that point about domain administrators, John, how do we stop that? Well, Zero Trust is actually put in place to help with that exact scenario where, that domain administrators group should only be required to log into domain controllers. So you can change the allow log on locally policies to what's allowed to log into what things on your network. So, for example, server administrators should only be able to log into servers. Workstation admins should only be able to log into workstations. We should change the local admin password routinely on all of those devices through, the local admin password solution or LAPS from Microsoft. And so these are all good best practices. And where can organizations get started? As a primer, Microsoft actually has a very, very good site that's dedicated now for businesses for Zero Trust. You can just go to Microsoft.com and you can follow the URL that I've got listed on there, and that's got some fantastic follow-up information. And so as we look at Zero Trust in the model, there's many different moving parts to Zero Trust. It's not just allowing logons. There's policy engines in place. There's network rules, there's data classification, there's infrastructure, there's threat protection, endpoint, identity protection. All of these play a role in Zero Trust because really what this is going to become is this is going to become a Zero Trust strategy for your organization. And so that policy engine that you have that's put in place kind of builds this all together. And one of the recommendations that I have is that lean on your vendors that you're working with because, one vendor may not be able to handle all of this. Maybe it's a combination of different vendors. But you have to look at this holistically, not just as the tools that we need. We also need to build in governance and compliance with the business. I think in the last session, Ian actually had a question about that in regards to, kind of governance with the business. Like, okay, great, we're going to put in Zero Trust, but now it's going to be annoying to my management or my sales team or my accounting team or my engineering teams, whatever are out there, and they don't really like it. Well, and I'll kind of lean back to you on that, John, because we deal with this on a daily basis where do we want to be in the news as the next organization that can't actually open their doors anymore because of this threat? Or are we going to take the approach of actually something happened, let's lock it down, let's investigate right now?
Well, and how spot on you are. I spend much of my days working with teams, with customers, so outside the IT team, but into the accounting team and the marketing team and the production teams and all these teams, working to help them understand that when IT implements Zero Trust principles, the principle of least privilege, when we create policies and rules that say, hey, you're not allowed to email people's social security numbers in an Excel file anymore outside the organization and those kind of things, we're not doing those to make their jobs more difficult or less convenient. We're doing those things to preserve their jobs in our company and our organization. So one of the ways that we're providing customer service to those teams, to those accountants and sales pros, all of them, is by protecting them from the things that they don't know, because it's not their job to know, it's our job to know. And much like, it's not a neurologist's job to necessarily understand all the nuances and details of the heart, but the heart's an important part while you're having your brain operated on. So there's a teamwork that has to go on there, and we work together, and we convince them that this isn't about taking away convenience or that sort of thing. This is the number one saddest moment for me right now is seeing IT pros on the hook because they were afraid of going to an executive and saying, look, if I don't isolate your machine when I investigate this malware incident and there is something going on, we could bring down all of production and cost the company considerable amounts. If I don't say, hey, we don't have our all of our VPN accounts with true MFA because some of them are application level or that sort of thing, and we just don't know how to make that work. Instead, they just say, yes, we have MFA enacted, and then they have an event, and their cyber policy doesn't pay off. And now they're answering, that IT pro that signed that document that attested that it was done is now answering to, the CEO, the boss, whoever it may be, for why they just cost the company, potentially 7 figures. And that's becoming a bigger deal. I unfortunately have seen a number of people's careers altered by that. And these are things that just didn't happen even 5 years ago. So it's a huge concern. And like you said, we've got to engage others, and we've got to really come together as a community to attack this and beat it back.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is that with organizations, John, I think that, every individual that's a member of the organization plays a role in IT security now. It's the security department, and then we've been saying that, hey, listen, everybody in IT has a role in this. And I'm actually changing that statement now, John, to saying that everybody that's employed by the organization and trusted business partners all play a role in security, because as we have trusted business partners that are out there, we're entrusting them with, being able to log on to resources, potentially being sensitive information. Well, why should we not ask the tough questions of them, saying, hey, listen, what type of security and compliance are you taking and have you had to go through? We had a great question that just came in, John, and I'll pass this question over to you. It's from Scott, and it's a fantastic question, and it's, what are some questions that I should ask when I'm selecting vendors to implement the components of Zero Trust in my organization?
Well, Dave, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in on this one because this is huge, and it's a great question, Scott. Thank you, because every vendor, of course, they want sales, so they want to tell you, they can do everything and deliver everything. But you need to remember that in most cases, the vendor doesn't share the level of risk you do. They may lose you as a customer if something goes wrong. You may lose significant amounts of revenue, significant amounts of capability, all that kind of thing. So it isn't really a shared responsibility model. So one of the things that I ask them, particularly when it comes to a security vendor, so say it's a firewalling vendor, that kind of thing, and I ask them, how do you engage when we, as your customer, your IT pro, when we think we have a problem and we don't know, what's going on or whatever, how do you engage in that? And so to give an example with that firewall vendor, if their engagement is, well, you call tech support, and if it's a firewall issue, we're going to help you, that's a non-starter for me. What I want somebody who says is, hey, I'm your account executive, so yeah, open up that tech support case, but get with me and I will have it escalated. And, even if it isn't in the firewall, we'll try and help you understand how to look at traffic in the firewall to see, or look at those logs. How did it get in? Which endpoints did it touch? Anything we can do to help you, we're willing to do. And absolutely ask them, are you willing? Do you have a history of working with other vendors? Because when an event occurs, you may have to bring together members of your endpoint management team, your intrusion prevention team, your firewall team. They may not all be one provider, and in fact, I think sometimes you end up with the best situation when they aren't. So, ask them, how they're going to be there for you beyond just selling you that product or that piece of the puzzle.
Awesome, John. So the next piece is that, okay, now we've had a chance to implement components of Zero Trust, ever-changing landscape that's out there. And so we talked about the next finished scenario with having issues. And one of the things that everyone that's listening to this presentation today should walk away with, knowing that there are baseline templates to help you get secure real quick. And so Microsoft has some published templates that are available through their security and compliance toolkit. And so those also include sample group policies you can test in your lab and see if they'll work properly for your organization. The Center for Internet Security also publishes those benchmarks as well, and you can have a variety of levels as to how secure you want to make the organizations at a minimum of like a level 1. A level 1 for a member server on the CIS benchmarks for Server 2019 include approximately 330 changes that would need to be made from a standard next finish. And on the Windows 10 desktop, level 1, it's a little over 500 changes that would be made through group policy to secure those systems. Now, obviously, you don't just want to throw in a benchmark or a baseline into a production environment without, extensive testing, but at least it gives you a place to get started because you don't have to reinvent the wheel with this. Microsoft has actually recently partnered with the Center for Internet Security, and they now have extended their vulnerability assessments, John, with Center for Internet Security recent templates. So now, real time, you can see how your organization is stacking up. You don't even need the templates in place because as you go through an IT security audit, these are the things that they're checking you against. So they're going to check you against the different types of frameworks that are out there. And Center for Internet Security is one of the most widely accepted baseline sets of policies that are there. If you're wondering how widely accepted they are, you can actually spin up Microsoft Azure virtual machines in your cloud, in your portal, and they can actually be pre-hardened with CIS benchmarks. So those can be pre-hardened so that you're not taking that next finish with all of those holes exposed. You have to get there, you can start there. And if you haven't started there, you can implement these benchmarks slowly throughout your server farm, and you can get yourself to a compliant state. From a Microsoft perspective, these new features inside of their Defender Advanced Threat Protection portal start to upload every 2 to 4 hours. So as you're making changes, this really is real time for you, and you can see what's going on. So they still have their generic vulnerability assessments, but now they have the ability to baseline those as well, which is very cool for organizations looking to improve their cybersecurity posture moving forward through 2022. Okay, so we talked a little bit, John, about the model of Zero Trust, the primer, the next finish scenario. We want to take and we want to make those changes. We have those baselines. I call this the constant improvement model. And with the constant improvement model, this is something that I look at as, especially with security, is that our job is never done. And I see so many organizations spending so much time trying to perfect their policies that they never get anywhere, and they're just leaving those holes open and they're leaving those holes exposed. So what are some thoughts for this to help organizations kind of move that needle forward, even if it's like just one change a day? Because in my mind, John, one change a day is better than nothing.
Absolutely, Dave. And I love that you have Voltaire's quote on there that Sammy is so constantly saying. I mean, it's a 300-plus-year-old quote, and it is just as relevant today as it was when Voltaire said it. So that's what I want everybody to take away when they think of this constant improvement model. Is that perfect is the enemy of good, so don't let it be. Take a step, and then take another step, and one after that. So yes, you may have 300 CVEs that you have to address, and you may have a lot of pressure to get them addressed, and all those sorts of things. But if you focus on the 300, you'll never get the first one done, let alone the 299th one done. So make a change. And it doesn't have to be a piece of software or a configuration change. It could be a process change. Maybe today's change to make things a little better is you set up your privileged access workstation, because, Dave, you and I run into that a lot, where a lot of IT pros are still using their daily driver machine to remote in and access things with their elevated admin credentials. And, that is a huge opening for attackers to come in at. And, recent data suggests that when we're talking about some of these attacks that are coming state-sponsored, that, Russia, China, they're dumping more money in developing cyber attacks that can destroy and disrupt. So these aren't just criminal attacks designed to get ransoms out of you or anything else. They're just designed to destroy and disrupt. And they're spending more money on that than they do on things like their space programs. So think about that for a minute. And you, as the IT pro of your organization, whether it be a mom and pop shop or a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company, it doesn't matter. You're the defense. You're the front line, and the generals and the back room all wrapped up together to defend against this. So take action today, take action tomorrow, and you will continue to improve. But be that sword of improvement, if you will, or spear of improvement.
Well, and we just had a great question come in from John. John, thank you very much for the question. It's, how often should an SMB of 100 to 150 employees do a security audit? And John, I can take this one. I believe that, traditionally we would do either annual or biannual security audits, and that definitely is not good enough anymore. So I believe that for the security posture that we have, we need to have what I call real-time insight and visibility into those configurations and those settings, so that if we get alerts coming out that there's a new 0-day, we need to know what part of our landscape that's impacting. So real-time vulnerability assessments and threat protection solutions are what you need. If it's something that's going to be done like once a month or once every 6 weeks, or somebody comes in and runs a scan for you, that doesn't cut it anymore. Because I tell you, the bad guys work 24 hours a day and 24 hours a day and 365 days a year. They don't stop. They don't sleep. They'll come at you at any hour. And so we need to make sure that we know what holes are in our infrastructure at any given point in time. So I would say that, you need real time in today's world that we live in. All right. So John, we're just having to deal with this working with some of our organizations that, we deal with right now. And it's cyber compliance right now and industry certifications. So for example, if you're a lab organization and you have some type of an ISO 9000 compliance and things like that, they're starting to throw cyber into the mix to keep those certifications. So having zero trust, not having next finish, implementing baselines and templates are becoming that much more important for the business, because now if they're not paying particular attention to, what cyber means to the business holistically, now what's happening is we're starting to potentially lose those certifications for our labs, because like I said earlier, remember, it's not just our organization, it's our partner organization. You have a business partner that's giving you 50% of your revenue. I would have to say that as that business partner, they're full well within their right to say, hey, listen, we have connectors between our business. We do a lot of transactional data. It's not just sales. Maybe we're intermingled between our thing like that. And because we're doing that, we want to make sure both sides are tightened up and buttoned up. So we're looking at from a cyber perspective, and we're having those conversations today. But what does this mean for you, John, for, industry certifications and potential loss of that for not following through with, your cybersecurity stance today?
Well, this is huge right now, as you mentioned, Dave. And so you focused on the laboratory accreditations. That's one. We have a number of different quality certifications, whether it be IATF, ISO, TS. I want to focus in on one of those because, I love when I discuss to try and give real-world examples so that people don't believe it's just opinion or speculation or that kind of thing. So in February of this year, Toyota had to shut down a number of its production lines in Japan because a key supplier was taken offline by a cyber attack. It cost Toyota over 13,000 produced vehicles. So that, when you think about it, and you think about how many dollars and cents that is, that's a huge number. And now when you think about the people. So while that was being remediated, a number of people from the supplier to other suppliers, because when Toyota shuts down a production line or any automotive manufacturer shuts down a production line, they stop taking incoming orders from all their suppliers. So one supplier who your company may have had nothing to do with or no knowledge of just caused you to lose your orders for the next week, which causes you to temporarily lay off coworkers and employees because you can't afford to keep paying them 40 plus hours a day when there's no revenue being generated. So this has huge ripple effect. And when we look at things like the QS standard or the ISO standard, these were certifications that were developed by major U.S.-based automotive manufacturers, so Ford, General Motors, those guys, and they really were focused on organizations in the automotive supply chain. So in that example I just gave you, it makes perfect sense that these certifications now are integrating numerous checks and compliance statements around cybersecurity. And if you don't engage with your organization now to understand what certifications they have and that sort of thing, here's what could happen. They have their next audit. Say it's a yearly audit, and it's for a TS certification. And they get the questionnaire that says, hey, do you have this business continuity plan that says this is how you're going to supply your customer if you're the victim of a ransomware attack? And of course, they come to IT because they don't know. And you say, well, the business continuity plan is this. And they give that to the auditor, and the auditor says, that's not enough. So we're going to put you in an at-risk status, and you have 6 months to deal with this. And now your organization has to decide if they're going to lose the certification that their customer, could be a 50% of your business customer, requires them to have, or whether you and IT are going to drop every other project you have going to find and implement a way to comply with this. And I can tell you what my experience says they're going to choose. I can also tell you that they're going to look very hard on IT of why weren't these things in place, why weren't they going on. And I can also tell you that whatever answer you give them, it often sounds like, Dave, you've heard me use this reference before, the teacher from the old Charlie Brown cartoons, right? Wow, 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 wow. They don't hear the words you're saying because they're really not concerned. They just want to maintain what they need to maintain so that they can keep product going out the door and dollars and cents coming in and everybody happy. So I know your message and our message here isn't so much into these specifics of individual certifications. It's just that people start understanding cybersecurity requirements are showing up in 2022 and more in 2023 in areas that you don't today interact with. So you can either get in front of that or wait for it to come yank you into it violently.
Awesome. So the next point that we'll talk about here, John, is we'll call it kind of the sins of our past, and that's that. A lot of organizations that are out there right now have an Active Directory infrastructure, and they probably migrated that over from, especially if the organization's been around for a long time, from Windows NT. And in Windows NT, we had a multi-domain infrastructure, and it was what we considered hard to manage, and we wanted to consolidate down to a single domain. And that was kind of the utopia that we lived in. So for years and years and years, we consolidated Active Directory domains from multiple domains, multiple security boundaries to a single security boundary. And inadvertently, what we did is we actually made it really easy on the bad guys to gain access if they had admin level credentials to not just one thing, but everything, because now it's all in one flat space. So, this is where Zero Trust is very important for your organizations, is that, if you are in that single domain, you need Zero Trust today because you need to limit who can log into what, where, and when. One of the things that we recommend, just because of the cyber threats that are out there today and what we're trying to implement Zero Trust to protect against, is take your most critical servers that are inside of your infrastructure, your hypervisors, your backup targets, your things that actually drive your hybrid cloud. Move those out to a separate domain and Active Directory forest, and we call that a fabric. And the reason that we do that is because we're introducing that second layer of security boundary. When you build that fabric, don't next finish it. Make sure you put in those benchmarks that we talked about. Make sure you subscribe to your advanced persistent threat protection, all right? We've done this hot and live with many organizations that are in that single domain realm. Most hypervisors support crossing over to new domains, and most backup targets and most backup vendors support this as well. So this is not something new. Then what we do is we really restrict who can gain access into that fabric, because although it takes me a long time to go through securing and hardening a production Active Directory domain, because there's so many moving parts with all my Windows 10 devices, with all my servers that are out there, with everything else, the fabric is very limited. It only has a single purpose in life. It drives my hypervisors, it drives my backup targets, and so it's a lot easier to secure that world and get there first. And so now organizations are taking that as kind of their test bed to see, how that's working for the security baselines and policies in place. And then they're able to move that over into production a lot faster. So anyways, that's a big one. It's just, if you don't have a fabric today, make sure you do this, because John and I have been part of many ransomware recovery efforts where there's a flat domain landscape, and they get admin level access through poor administrative practices, and then there's almost zero recoverability options. And we've seen customers without a fabric actually have to pay the ransom, which is not a good situation for anyone to be in. So this next one's for you, John. Privileged access and administrative tools. What are your thoughts about RDP as the generic tool that we use? Our good friend Sammy, I sat one of his presentations, and he actually now calls it the ransomware deployment protocol. And so, we don't need to actually RDP into a domain controller to create users, do we? Is like we can set that up on jump boxes, on privileged access workstations, things like that, right? And the last thing I want you to talk about is, do you find that our IT administrators still have bad habits of logging into their daily drivers for administrative purposes?
So Dave, and we have a lot of content, so I'll be pretty brief here, but I wanted to really bring forth some of the things that you just mentioned. RDP is convenient, it's efficient because we know how to use it and that sort of thing. But it's also, as you mentioned, and as Sammy likes to call it, a great way for ransomware to take advantage of. And here's another thing that a lot of people don't think about, but I see this all the time. When they have a server that they enable RDP to, they do nothing to protect the other ports and protocols on that server. So RDP uses port 3389, of course, and they don't have any other protocols and ports blocked on, say, their network switches that are downstream. Even when they configure firewall rules on that local machine, think about it. If the machine was compromised, the first thing they would do is turn those rules off. So I'm all about a layered approach, kind of that flaky crust approach. So I like to have things configured on the OS, the software, the OS, the switch beyond it, the switch beyond that, routers, firewalls, all of it. I layer it up. If somebody's going to penetrate into mine, they're going to have enough energy to go through defense after defense after defense after defense. And if you think about how ballistic panels are made or bulletproof vests, that kind of thing, that's very much how they're made. I invite everybody to go look at a YouTube video of those. So when something strikes them, that first layer, it gets punched through pretty quick, but the energy of that bullet or the missile, whatever it is, gets absorbed, and so finally it just can't make it through the rest. So build up those protections over and over and over. And a great way that I do that is just as you mentioned. I use jump boxes as privileged access workstations, and I create access control lists and protocol filters intermediate between me and the jump box and the jump box and the device I'm connecting to. So there's multiple things that can be done there. And then ultimately, use tools such as the RSAT or as PowerShell on those privileged access workstations to limit it down even further. And, you mentioned it, Dave, and we still see this, and I get it. It's convenient, it's efficient, but it is horrible if you don't want to have a security event. Stop running as admin. The UAC was a pain when it first came out. It's not really that disruptive anymore, and it really could be the difference between somebody infecting a single machine and somebody bringing down your entire network. And, on that note, you mentioned this earlier, everyone is under this new methodology where the attacks are often coming in on holidays. So IT pros are being called in more often than ever before on a holiday to deal with these cyber attacks because, again, they want to disrupt and destroy, so what better time to do that during a holiday? So with that, I'll let you move on so we can get to more of this great content.
All right, so the next one, John, is multi-factor. We've seen this come through as policy requirements as part of cyber insurance. And so with those policy requirements, one of the big things that I've seen coming through in 2022 is MFA everything. And this becomes a problem for a lot of organizations because they have very loose control over the service accounts and what exactly they can do. Because typically when we would get an install from an application coming in from a vendor, they would say, okay, I have the service and it needs to run this on the particular system, and the cheater way of doing this would be just throw it into the local administrators group and it would work. This is developer's heaven. Everything is just going to work out of box. But the reality is that we need to restrict and constrain what those service accounts can actually do. And so making sure that your service accounts don't have interactive logons, making sure that you're looking at group managed service accounts, so you're managing those passwords across those service accounts, and working with your vendors to figure out exactly what their applications are requiring. Because to be coming back to IT or the ITsec group and saying, well, this is just the way the application works, and if you don't like it, then uninstall it. Well, I'm finding that a lot of organizations are actually doing that, whereas in the past, they were basically leaning towards the path of when we would take and work with these vendors, we would take and comply. And so now that just doesn't work anymore. So if these tools are security threats, then we have to isolate and contain these. The next thing with your multi-factor authentication is after you get this deployed, and every organization's having to go through this, we have to deal with the headaches and tickets coming in, training of the users, and, it's just the new modern world that we have. And if you're looking for a really easy way to take and sell this to an old school user that you may have on the network that's not a big fan of MFA, you just say, listen, do you just log into your banking application, or do you use multi-factor authentication for all your deposits and all the money that's going into your personal bank account? Because for that kind of stuff, they're probably using MFA, even if they don't even understand or know that they are. And so I equate it the same way for them, saying, listen, you protect your personal data with multi-factor. Why wouldn't we protect the key business assets with multi-factor? And with John, you spoke about those attacks coming in from different countries. And this is where you have to evaluate where you do business. if you don't do business with, and I'm not picking on any country in particular here, but let's say that, you don't do any business with Brazil. There's none, zero. There's not even should be an email coming from the country of Brazil. Block it. Block these countries. I don't want like an IT admin logging in, even if trying MFA from that other country. And if they happen to be down there and need access, then we can have them call in and we can make an override for that. A great example to this, I was working and I was on vacation, John. And I'm part of a couple different IT organizations. And they said, hey, Dave, we're getting an alert here that, you were trying to log in from Hawaii, but, we know that, you live in Calgary. Like, what's going on here? And I was like, no, that was me. I was doing some work. And so having them actually contact me gave me great peace of mind that we were watching that. But it also was a good reminder saying, hey, listen, anywhere that you're not supposed to log in, especially with admin accounts, block that stuff down. If you have North America only based support, lock it down. Don't allow logins from anywhere for this stuff, okay? And that's part of that zero trust model. All right. This one here is going to be for you, John. We've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll do 2 more slides and then a couple questions here. So privileged identity management, John, just takes this right into the next level, so even beyond zero trust. Can people get started with PIM today? Like, is this something that's really hard to get set up? Like, even you think about your Azure account or Intune account, elevating to get like global admin or contributor access into your Azure tenant, can they just do this today? Is there a lot of setup, or is it just there and need to be configured?
So, Dave, this is great, and this is one that I highly recommend. It goes back to that slide where we talked about, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Do something constantly to improve things, and privileged identity management is one of the areas where you really can get going easily, quickly, and starting immediately with only a little bit of knowledge and a lot of desire to improve things. So, if you want to talk about Azure PIM, so I'll look at that and privileged identity management. And, first, we'll talk about how this really does help you, and it minimizes the amount of people that have access to your secure resources, whether they be, wherever they are in your hybrid cloud. And the reason you do this, of course, is for the same reason that we do zero trust everywhere. It minimizes the likelihood of cyber attacks getting through or a accidental breach or cyber risk, right? Somebody accidentally getting access to something they shouldn't have to and maybe deleting a resource when they shouldn't or changing a resource when they shouldn't, that sort of thing. One beautiful thing that PIM does is it provides a lot of just-in-time privileged access capability and that sort of thing. And, there is a great quick start available for this right inside your Azure portal. So you can get up and running in minutes. And they've got some great documentation that walks you through it, some videos. You can get Microsoft Fast Track to help you. So this is absolutely something that everybody can take advantage of today. And, likewise, for Intune Endpoint Manager, it's there for you and it can help. And, if you aren't taking advantage of it, one thing I'd like you to do today is just go out and take a read a little bit about it, right? And check it out and see if it's right for you, because I believe you'll find it is, and I believe you'll find that it's something that you can do right away.
All right, John, we're going to wrap up with one more item here. This may be new for some individuals, so I just wanted to cover this as part of Zero Trust, and that's just-in-time access. So the concept of just-in-time access is not leaving open-ended connections out there. So think about having to RDP to something. So we try not to RDP, but if we do have to RDP to something, limit the time of that connection. So if you have a contractor that's in and says they need to be in for a couple hours, okay, let's open up some real-time rules. And this is very specific to your cloud-based infrastructure, because this is actually available by default now with Microsoft Defender for Cloud inside of your Azure portal. You just need to turn it on. And so you can actually limit the time of connectivity, remote connectivity for those connections coming inbound into your VMs. And also, please make sure that you're MFAing all of those RDP connections as a second layer of security. And with that, we've got a really good question that actually just came in here. And this question is, again, from John. And he was asking if there's a specific RMN solution that you would suggest. We're currently using TeamViewer, and I hear that it's not as secure as it possibly could be. I'll just give a quick, brief answer to this, John, and then you can jump in. One of the things that I recommend with any of those RMM solutions to help you lock them down is to make sure that you are taking and setting up a single sign-on so that you can control those accounts, because then your conditional access policies that you have are in play, trying to authenticate across to those partner solutions. And John, I'll let you kind of wrap up with that, and then I think we'll be done after this question.
Thanks, Dave. And John, another great question. Thank you so much. I'll kind of stick to some of the publicly available stuff. I agree with you that TeamViewer has some publicly disclosed history of security risks and that kind of thing. It was designed, its original premise, as many of the RMM solutions was for convenience for IT pros, and unfortunately the security parts of it haven't evolved. They have a history of some known attacks coming out of some of the areas of concern right now with China and other state-sponsored things. So rather than mention a specific product that I like, because there's a number of them out there, I will, like Dave did, kind of give you a tip on something that I always look for in a solution I'm going to use. And one, that is where it has to be an interactive exchange between the user and the IT pro, at least to initiate the contact. And I know that can be inconvenient. Sometimes IT people are like, well, no, I need to remote into the machine when people aren't at that desk and that kind of thing. You need to understand the risk you're putting yourself at when you choose that, because you are accountable for that risk. So in our situations, we always have an interaction with the client before we remote in. So even if it's a deferred remote session, we make them kind of log in and acknowledge something and complete that handshake process before we can get in. And we really like that kind of solution. So Dave, that's all I got.
All right. And with that, I think we'll hand it back to our gracious host, David Rammel, and he will help wrap things up. Thank you guys, everyone, for having us.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks again, guys, for a great presentation and answering all those questions. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Victoria, for some closing announcements and the giveaway of our high-end Bose wireless noise-canceling Bluetooth headphones, for which you must be present to win. Victoria, take it away.
Thank you so much, David. Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Waba, and I just want to thank you all for joining us today. Just a few closing announcements before we depart today. As you leave, you will be asked to take a short survey with your opinions of the event. We just ask that you please share those honest opinions. Our editors read every single comment, and they really do help shape our future events. And speaking of future events, we really want to thank our sponsor, Rubrik. They're sponsoring this event because they believe in this community and want to support events like these. So please share your support and appreciation by downloading their resources and visiting their site for a demo. We do have a demo link to the right of your audience console if you want to go ahead and check that out. It's through their underwriting of these events that we can bring more summits in the future. So thank you, Rubrik. Thank you, speakers, fellow moderators.